boy, was it an active deadline. One of the biggest beneficiaries, we're talking about early winners, has to be the Miami Dolphins. They've really rebuilt how we look at this team as we head into the second part of the season. We're wondering what that destination was for Bradley Chubb, and it ended up being Miami. Miami ended up actually getting the rose as they were willing to throw in a first-round pick, one of the first-round picks that they acquired from the San Francisco 49ers. Now they are set up with a star pass rusher added to a defense that was already pretty solid, a pretty solid defense. You add in, they also made a trade with San Francisco, another trade with San Francisco, to acquire Jeff Wilson Jr., add him to the backfield as they got rid of Chase Edmonds in the Chubb deal. So now they have a backfield of Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. So they're rebuilding the San Francisco 49ers backfield with the former San Francisco 49ers run game coordinator and Mike McDaniel. What do you think about what Miami was able to do at the deadline?
Well, Bradley Chubb's another thing, but as it comes to the running game, which I know you mentioned off the bat here, I would just like to state that for the record, Kyle Ledbetter said at the start of the season, I don't think this Miami Dolphins run game is good at all. Just because you add Chase Edmonds, just because you add Raheem Mostert doesn't make it a good running game. And I was absolutely correct. I would like to point that out at this point. But at the same point, they admitted their mistake and they've kind of worked to revamp that running game a little bit. Not that it's like super necessary for what they're going to do. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle have the most receiving yards in the first 7 games of any teammates in NFL history. So it's not like they necessarily need a running game to supplement what they're getting from those two guys. It's really interesting to see them go that route. From the 49ers standpoint, made all the sense in the world to trade Jeff Wilson or Elijah Mitchell, because you could keep them as backups and have their value decrease until they leave as free agents, which I know that worked out with Jimmy Garoppolo, but it also made sense for them to capitalize on the value that they had now with having Christian McCaffrey.
Being able to turn an undrafted free agent like Jeff Wilson was a couple years ago into a 5th round pick is a win for the 49ers. As much as we talk about, is it a potential loss? The early goings of this Miami trade with Trey Lance, obviously instrumental pieces, instrumental picks coming back that turned into players in Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Bradley Chubb. That's the talk of Twitter. If you're Tua in your young career, you have to be really happy with how this deadline went for you. You have to be really happy, honestly, with how the offseason went, right? Because you get an offensive-minded head coach in McDaniel. You get Tyreek. I thought the running game was going to be a little bit better, but I don't think that it's bad at all when you add another piece that knows the offense, like Jeff Wilson Jr. to it. This has been a really good season for Tua, other than the injury. But if you were to take out the injury from this season, the Dolphins are currently undefeated in games in which Tua starts and finishes said game, and that includes a victory over the Buffalo Bills. You're the only loss against Buffalo this year, so that has to mean something as this team tries and build something special. And Tua is able to do 2 things really well. He's able to game manage, which is a skill unto itself, but every once in a while, he's able to really provide a spark to this offense. We saw it earlier in the year against Baltimore. We've seen sparks of it as the season's gone on, where McDaniel is just giving him a little bit more, and a little bit more. And we're finally starting to see him live up to the expectations of Tua Tagovailoa when he was initially drafted to come into the league, a high-end quarterback or someone that you could at least have starting for you for the next 10 years and be happy with it. Still not quite Justin Herbert in terms of ability, but maybe he doesn't have to be. And that's what I think the Dolphins were hoping for. You just need to build pieces around him, taking advantage of his rookie contract. And I think you have the horses. Like, if you wanted to really make a run, upset a team, like you have juggernauts in Buffalo and Kansas City in there. But we saw last year, things sometimes could break right. You could be this year's Cincinnati Bengals defense, offensively. They have the pieces to do it.
Or, I mean, you could even just be the Cleveland Browns from a couple of years ago, where like, hey, we upset the Steelers and then got the right to get pummeled by the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, that's
I wouldn't
not
say
bad.
Pummel. They were
they were getting pummeled, and then Mahomes got hurt. Okay, let's not change the math on that. They were getting pummeled. The math
a little bit. Hurt. The math was that it was turned out being a lot closer.
No, it turned out to be close when Chad Henne became quarterback. You are correct. When they replaced Chad Henne in there, it was a closer game. But for Miami, they haven't won a playoff game in 22 years. they're going all in on trying to win that one playoff game this year. And next year, they're in still a pretty good position. I mean, Tua is still on a rookie contract next season. Waddle's going to be on a rookie contract. They're going to have some cap space because like Melvin Ingram is on a 1-year contract and he's been great. So he's probably outplayed that 1-year contract. So
they wish they had the draft pick back that they lost due to the tampering scandal, but no use crying over spilled milk.
Next year, they're going to be a similar team. And this year, they are trying to go all in on getting that one playoff win because the peak for this team is the second round of the playoffs. And damn, they are going all in to try and get that. And they're going to bring back a lot of the same team.
I wouldn't say that's a peak. Again, I go back to last year's Bengals team. I go back to the 49ers team from a couple of years ago. There's teams that can go on a run if they have the right people in the building. And I think they have playmakers offensively. They have now a edge rusher. Saw how important that was for the Los Angeles Rams when they acquired Von Miller to assist them and gain a little bit of a pass rush. Those are the type of things that matter. They seem like incremental moves, but they're incremental moves in the right direction. And I think that blow for blow, they can go with any of the teams at the top of the conference, or at least catch them off guard on any given week.
That's another conversation about catching them off guard and all that stuff. But so the Bradley Chubb trade specifically, I genuinely didn't know what to do with Bradley Chubb at the deadline because it was one of those situations where I was like, if they traded him for a 3rd round pick, I would have been like, that seems right. But if they trade him for a 1st and Chase Edmonds, I'm like, that seems right. I genuinely had no idea what to evaluate Bradley Chubb as because of how crazy his career is.
Go back to the video. We were literally talking about it just a couple days ago. We were like, maybe a 2nd and a 3rd, that Von Miller deal that got done. But the fact that they were able to maneuver that in the 1st is a good get for Denver, a surprising get for Denver as they've waved the white flag and are blowing up this season. Hey, Miami doesn't care about that. Miami's just happy that they got the player that they wanted on their team. Boo-hoo for Denver. Miami gets Bradley Chubb. The question, I guess, too, is how good is Bradley Chubb? Is he worth a 1st round pick? We'll see. Sometimes we see players go to a team that is vying for a playoff spot and they get re-energized by the situation. We saw early on in the season that Bradley Chubb, 5.5 sacks through the first 7 weeks with Denver, had a little bit more oomph to him this season. And maybe that's because he thought that Denver was going to be a lot better than they ended up being. Going to this Miami team where you know that they're going to be competing for the playoffs the rest of the season, he can play a little bit freer, looser, and happier knowing that he's going to be on a pseudo contender, or at least a contender for a playoff spot, as opposed to Denver.
Yeah. I mean, it was also a contract year for Bradley Chubb. Like he's on his 5th-year option this year. I assume Miami's going to re-sign him because why would they trade a 1st round pick if they didn't plan to keep him on the team long term?
Keep him around the guys like Christian Wilkins and Xavier Howard and all the other stars that they have built up around that defense. Miami has the pieces to kind of keep competing, like you mentioned, for the next couple years. They've had teams that, like you said, could have like a one-off year, get to the 1st round of the playoffs and get eliminated, but they haven't really been able to sustain winning. I think that if you told me at least the next 3 years, unless things just absolutely blow up or go haywire for them, I think they can at least manage that, particularly too if you think that McDaniel can continue to be a solid NFL coach, which I think he is. We have some data now. We have half a season in. The players have bought in, which I think is a powerful thing in the NFL itself when you get players to buy in. You look at that Brooklyn Nets situation we talked about in another video, right? Where Steve Nash could never really get his players to buy in. Mike McDaniel seems to be the type of guy where, yes, he can play the buddy card, but he can also be a serious head coach when it matters. And he, more than importantly, too, in the NFL, schematically, he seems to know what it takes to get his guys open. And it's easy to get guys open like Tyreek Hill, but still, it's fun to have those chess pieces to move around the board in his offense.
Mike McDaniel, the best thing I can say about him so far is he's not getting in his own way. Like, we have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Let's throw the ball to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle a fuck ton of times. Like, he's good enough to not get in his own way. And that's something that doesn't come through a lot.
I think something about him, too, is he's able to recognize what his talent does and doesn't do, because he was one of the people that advocated for Deebo Samuel to start running the ball last year. And we look at what that did for the 49ers at the tail end of the last year. Bring that same type of mentality to the Miami Dolphins. And like you said, being able to understand situations in which Waddle or Tyreek Hill could best benefit the offense. That's why McDaniel has got this team to where they are at this point in the season. And I think adding a piece like Jeff Wilson Jr., although it seems like such a minor move, acquiring a running back that was a backup running back turned starter for a couple weeks in San Francisco. Those are the type of moves that successful organizations, successful teams, and successful GMs make to make their roster just a smidge better. And we talk about how tight this wild card race is going to turn towards the end. If you already accepted the division as a foregone conclusion with the Buffalo Bills, then you start looking around the wild card picture. Obviously, Cincinnati coming off a devastating Monday night loss. And in that loss, too, they've also have to deal with the ramifications of losing Jamar Chase for 4 to 6 weeks or however long they're going to be out with Jamar Chase. Further around the AFC.
Yeah, you can look at the Chargers.
The Chargers and the Chargers are a struggling team. We're going to talk about the Chargers a little bit, but the Raiders aren't really battling back. We don't see that happening.
How about the Jets? The Jets going to make it.
The Jets have, we talk about all the questions that Tua faced at the quarterback position. Zach Wilson has all those questions swirling around him as the Jets try and make a bit of a playoff push. I think Miami is in the best situation to lock down one of those playoff spots, and I feel as though these moves almost secure it for them.
For McDaniel's part, it's not just playing into what Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle do, which is create space, drag routes, yards after catch. It's also playing into what Tua does well, which is be very accurate in the short field, which I know isn't sexy. Like we talk about that with Kirk Cousins, and no one thinks Kirk Cousins is a franchise quarterback other than Minnesota. But basically,
some people think Kirk Cousins is sexy, man. Come on, don't do that to my guy, Kirk.
Kirk. But I mean, so with the Tua part, like there was one play in the Dolphins and Lions game this weekend where Tua with I mean, I know the Lions defense sucks, but with 2 defenders in the camera shot, the ball disappears behind both of them and feeds it to Waddle within an incredibly thin window. And it's just a little 7-yard slant route, but I'm watching that. I'm like, wow, that was a really great throw by Tua. He's really good at short field accuracy. And so building an offense to what those strengths are is not going to get them to the top 5. It's not going to get them to the best offenses in the league, but it's going to make them a top 10 to 12 offense. And, you know, the last time Miami had a top 10 offense was 1995. 1995 was the last time the Miami Dolphins had a top 10 offense. So like if you play into those strengths, you have enough talent to have an above average offense. And this year the defense has struggled. It's ranked 20th in DVOA coming into this week, but we think that the strongest part of the Dolphins is that defense. And we know that they've forced turnovers in the past. So maybe that'll come around again in good fortune and they'll start to look a little bit better. But if we think of the defense as the strong suit of the Dolphins, which hasn't been the case the first half of the season, but if we think of it that way, a team with an above average offense and above average defense, that could win a playoff game.
Well, that's why you get guys like Bradley Chubb, right? Because even if he's not putting up gaudy sack numbers that we would hope of a guy of his position, he's still going to at least apply pressure, and pressure sometimes will force turnovers. That's the importance of getting a guy that can really put heat on the opposing quarterback. When you consider their offseason too, I think that the Miami Dolphins played this season as good as you can. And we'll see what it means for them in the second half, but I would expect that it at least means a playoff berth